Those of you who are joining us, welcome to the final Newcastle Institute webinar or forum for this year. All but one of our forums have been via webinar due to the obvious reason that we've been talking about all year. I'm Ross Kerridge. I'm one of the New Institute Committee, and we're being joined tonight by Karl Kruszelinski. Karl hardly needs any introduction for those who are new. The Newcastle Institute was formed 15 years ago as a think tank to promote diverse ideas and rational discussion in Newcastle and more broadly. And we have an interesting program of meetings once a month on a variety of topics. We acknowledge Newcastle has always been a place of learning and discussion for thousands of years. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land here, the Awabakal and the Worimi people. And in a sense, we're also the custodians of an intellectual tradition of Socrates, Rousseau and Voltaire, of the clash of ideas and valuing discussion. On that note, I'd like to just note the sad passing of a member and a notable Newcastle person, Professor Ralph Robinson, former Professor of Philosophy at the University of Newcastle. A wonderful person and sad to lose him. But anyway, on with tonight. Karl Kruszelinski is well known to, I think, most people. He's one of Australia's best science communicators and has been in the game for many years. But Karl and I actually met over 40 years ago when we were both medical students at Sydney University. Karl had had an interesting career before then in physics and driving taxis and various other things. And he was a personality then. And we've gone on in our lives. I've followed a fairly conventional career, and Karl has done much more important things. But this year has been a challenging year, and it has been easy to get depressed about the state of the world and the existential threats to the world and our society. But Karl is an eternal optimist and thinks there are many reasons from science to be optimistic. And that's what he's going to be telling us about tonight. So over to you, Karl.
Hello, look, thank you very much. Very glad to be there at NUI. We're trying to make the world a better place. And here we are making a little place. So I'll start off by sharing my screen with you, making sure that I hit the sound button. And here we go. Oh, look, I've got the share computer sound button done. Okay, so let's just see if this thing works properly. And here we go. Now, with a bit of luck, is that working? So what do you see there, Ross?
Yep, that's working perfectly. It's
You can
very
see
colourful.
DrKarl Surfing Safari through science.
And it's a very colourful shirt.
Okay, let's rock. So let's talk about global warming, and there's a happy message here. And so the first thing, I've only got 5 things because I've got a fairly short attention span, basically. And so 5 things I can remember. So firstly, there has been a big cover-up for the last 30 years by big fossil fuel, like big tobacco, big alcohol, nothing personal, it's just business. Secondly, why on earth burn carbon? The answer is that when you're burning carbon, a barrel of oil has the labour of a labourer working for 10 years. 48 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, or 200 kilograms of coal. That's the amount of energy in this stored sunshine. So it makes a lot of sense that if you want 10 years labour, instead of paying $500,000 a year because the current labour rates for Australia are $50,000 a year, you pay $50 for a barrel instead of $500,000. That's why we went down this pathway. However, the greenhouse gases catch and then dump into the atmosphere heat. How much heat? 400,000 Hiroshima bombs worth of heat every day. You can do that for a day or a week, month, even a year. Possibly a decade, but for decades and decades and decades and centuries? No way, man. And what has been the result of it? Well, many things, but one surprising effect is that we have actually tipped the Earth off its axis by a tiny, tiny amount. But nevertheless, we did that by melting. This year, it's going to be 750 billion tons of ice. And we melt it mostly in polar regions. Centrifugal force, I know the physicists are hating me for saying that. Centrifugal force, it then flows towards the equator and throws it off balance, like putting a weight onto a smoothly spinning bicycle wheel. So we've tipped the Earth off its axis, but we can not only stop it but reverse it. All we have to do is go back to number one and stop the cover-up from happening. But now that we know this is happening, we can do something about it. So what about removing carbon dioxide directly from the air? Well, there's an article here from the Scientific American called The Last Resort, January 2019, and asks, can we remove enough to stop or even reverse climate change? And the answer is yes, we can. Here you can see them dealing with a bunch of methods, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, which work in different pathways from fully biological to fully military industrial, and then rating them on how much you can draw over 1 year or 10 years and how many dollars per tonne it costs to do it. So there's reforestation and afforestation, where you plant trees to clear stuff. You can do the whole carbon capture with plants, and they can do a huge amount. We're not exploiting all their full stuff. We could get rid of a lot of the area that we use for agriculture, because 40% of all the food is wasted. We can do this biochar, which is like charcoal, and it once again has its own advantages and disadvantages. We can get rock and pulverize it into dust, increase the surface area, and it can fertilize the soil and also draw carbon dioxide. And we can do the fully military industrial method of direct air capture. And we've actually been doing this since 2017 with these machines from a Swiss company, Climeworks. And each machine can withdraw from the air about 900 tons a year. So if you want to pull 1 year's worth of human carbon dioxide out of the air, you need something like 25 to 40 million of these machines. And you're thinking, 25 to 40 million? That's impossible. Well, it's about 1/3 to 1/2 of the number of new cars we make every year. We'll go back to that. Then we're talking about fertilizing iron, and people have done this to help the plankton grow and draw more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and of course carbon sequestration in the soil, and that works as well. This is Pearl Harbor, 1941. And the Americans went absolutely ape after being bombed. And so they started rationing fuel and stopping people from driving cars, and even stopped the car companies from making cars. And they had these ads, "Are you playing square?" But they stopped making cars very, very quickly and switched everything over to military production. Consider this plane, the B-24 Liberator. Now, look at the history. In 1939, the US Army was the 30th in the world, and to pull the artillery, they had horses, not machines. And while the Nazis had thousands of tanks, the Americans had 32. Then, in May 1940, FDR gave a speech saying we've got to do something about the fact we've got only 1,700 planes in the Army, Air Force, military, and they're mostly obsolete. We need 50,000 planes. So that was in 1940. Now, the car has got 15,000 parts, but one of these Liberators has got 500,000 parts, which are made to very high production values, very tight tolerances, and have to be assembled by skilled people. The number of cars dropped from 3 million down to 0, and Ford set up a company, a site up at Willow Run, and accidentally invented the thing called JIT, called just in time, which is still being used in many facilities around the world today. In 1940, the US had 32 bombers. Total aircraft production since the beginning of time was less than 3,000 planes. By 1944, they built 100,000. By 1945, they'd built another 200,000. Their total aircraft production was 1/3 practically, from 32. The war was won as much by the machine shops as by the machine guns. And this gives us inspiration for climate change. Now think about this plane, huge aeroplane, 20 by 30 meters, 30 tons, big engines that can get up to nearly 500 kilometers an hour, 2,500 kilometers. But they didn't have really good plans for it, because that was those days where each plane was built individually by hand, like a tailor would make a suit for you. Sure, there'd be some plans, but then as they went along, they'd make it differently. And every single plane that had been made to then was not made on an assembly line. They were made individually. Yeah, sure, they bolted standard bits together, but they put it together individually. So Ford set up a plant at Willow Run in Michigan, which was the largest single-story building in the world. Now, we are talking Pearl Harbor. We are talking here getting serious about climate change, as we are getting serious, as the Americans did back then, about not losing World War II. It was over 1 kilometre long by a third of a kilometre across. And this is when they started. And this was less than a year later. The largest single-story building in the whole world. There's the plans. Now, because the planes had been built individually, there were no proper plans or blueprints. So they got 200 drafting people to draw up plans for the better part of a year, because they did it and then did it again and did it again. And the paper plans occupied enough volume to fill 2 big shipping containers. That's what they did. And there's the plans, kind of. And here they are flying in 44, where a couple of dozen of them bombed the biggest oil refinery that the Nazis had in Romania, and a lot of them didn't come back. That's war for you. Here's the plan. See the plane just going off, stretching off into the distance? Well, they were manufacturing these planes, not at the rate of 1 a year or 1 a month, 1 every hour. Just think about that. One of those planes rolling out the door every hour. That is what the Americans did, and that's what we can do with climate change, with these machines. We can go zero carbon for electricity for the whole world in 10 years, zero carbon for transport in 15 years. We can talk about that later in the Q&A, and especially we can also talk about going zero carbon for steel and for concrete, each of which is about 8% of the world's carbon. Agriculture will take a little bit longer because it's alive, it's got DNA, and it'll try and fight us, but we'll get through. There's nothing scientific stopping us from doing it right now, or even having done it back in 1980, which I'm happy to talk about later. The only thing stopping us is a complete lack of political will, which the Americans got in spades on the 7th of December 1941. Now, I'd like to use here as my role model for political will that politician with the splendidly Victorian name, or actually another politician. Now, here's Chairman Mao in 1952 saying, let's have a loss of peace. And then a few years later, he shifted over into power grows from the barrel of a gun. It does, but it's terrible. You end up with lots of dead people. I prefer the political power without violence, which we're lucky enough to have in Australia and so far in most of the so-called democracies around the world. Here's a man with a splendidly Victorian name. Now, how did Barnaby Joyce get to be a politician? Well, he went over Queensland for 3 years, wearing out 4 car engines. And he'd go to anybody who would stop and say, hi, I want you to vote for me. And he'd bother them for a couple of hours. And then finally they'd vote for him. And then he did that all across Queensland for 3 years, then got into federal parliament and the Senate, and then into being the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. And various things happened to him for various reasons. Now, one thing about politicians, they're not lazy. I ran for politics in 2007 and failed, but I spoke to a lot of politicians. And one thing that really stuck with me that I did not know before was that politicians work really hard. They're up there at 6 o'clock in the morning for the raising of a flag at an RSL, and they're there at 11 o'clock at night at the local dance. And the other thing is that they really put their lives into what they're doing. And there are good politicians. What I was really surprised was that there are good politicians on both sides of politics. And what's more important is the person rather than the label. I was so surprised. I had no idea. But it can get terribly lonely as well. Now, for the second bit of good news, and then we'll get through this quickly, then Ross will go into Q&A. So the second bit of good news is that besides being able to fix global warming, the students today are smarter than you and me, Ross, but they don't know as much. After a little while, they will know as much, and they're still smarter than they can go further. How do we know this? Well, it's called the Flynn effect. And here's Flynn. And let's just look at the IQ. Here's the IQ curve. See the IQ there? What is it? Oh, this IQ curve. Well, the way you get an IQ curve is you give a test to a whole bunch of people. And then you shift the result left and right until you get an average of 100. And then you expand or shrink the curve until you've got 2/3 of the population fitting in there between 85 and 115. And me, I'm over there at 110, not particularly high IQ, but I read a lot. I haven't got much horsepower. Ross is a lot smarter than me, and so are practically all of my fellow medical students. But I do know how to use what little horsepower I have fairly effectively. That's me, Dr. Karl. But a little while ago, I went to the University of the Sunshine Coast. This is following on from this. And they gave me a lovely floppy gown, velvet, and a lovely floppy hat. And I walked around on stage and they gave me a bit of paper. On the bit of paper it said, I'm a doctor of the university. I'm not a real doctor. It's only an honorary one. But at least I'm a doctor, which means that in fact that I am now not Dr. Karl, but Dr. Karl. Doctor, give me the news. I got a case of loving you. Moving right along. So the IQ tests are calibrated to give an average of 100. And all of the kids have been given this WISC test, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale, which has been recalibrated upwards a couple of times over the last 2/3 of a century because the kids have got smarter. So if today's average school student did the IQ test that their parents did, they get 109. If their grandparents, 118. We know this because the way that Americans learn geography is by invading another country. And since 1932, the Americans have done IQ tests on every single one of the tens of millions of people they've taken into the military under hard military conditions. None of this, please sir or miss, can I sneak off to the bathroom to look up the answer on my smartphone? And so we've been measuring the IQ in America and every other country around the world that can afford to do IQ tests on their kids. And we've been seeing the IQ going up and up and up at a rate of about 0.3 of an IQ point per year, or 9 IQ points every 30 years. And there's different tests like the Wechsler, like the Raven's progressive matrices, where you put things around, or similarities, or arithmetics, or comprehension, but they sort of average out to 0.3 of an IQ point per year, 9 IQ points per generation. We do not know why. It is a mystery. But we know that there have been huge changes. Back in the year 1900, only about 3% of jobs involved thinking, and the other 97 were you shifted something from here to there because somebody who was in that 3% told you to do it. And secondly, the world has become so much more abstract. So if you go to your average student today, it's quite different from one of 1920. If you go to a high school student of 1920 and you say, tell us about a cat or a dog, they would say, the dog chases the cat. But today they'd say, well, obviously you're talking about a lactating quadruped that also has a big role in our society. Are you talking about how it influences in the past, or their use as a comfort animal, etc., etc.? So it's a whole different world. We do not know why. It's officially mysterious, but we do know that it's real. And now, the third bit of good news for the future. You are living in the most peaceful time ever in the history of the human race. How do I know this? Because I've read this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. A few problems I have with that book. Firstly, he's got more hair than I do. And secondly, it's got too many pages, 10 to the 10 to the 10. Didn't get that joke. Okay, 1,024 pages. Okay, I think my delivery was bad on that joke. But it'll take you a week to read the book. Whereas if you read Factfulness by Hans Rosling, you can do that in an afternoon. And in both those books, they talk about how things are getting better on the big scale and on the small scale. Let's look at the big scale here. People say that World War II was the bloodiest war in history on a percentage basis. No. Go back to the year 775 AD. And in that year, the Chinese emperor, to put down the An Lushan revolt, killed 1 in every 3 people in China. 1 in every 6 people in the whole world. In the 1300s, Genghis Khan, to build the largest land empire known in the history of the human race, stretching all the way from the Pacific coast of China, across through India and Turkey and Greece and the Middle East and across to Poland and so forth. He did that huge work by killing 1 in every 9 people in the whole world. And as a side effect, I've got Genghis Khan DNA. The Second World War, 1 in every 44. These are still terrible numbers, 1 in 6, 1 in 9, 1 in 44, but at least the trend is going the right way. And then if you look at the small scale, like murders in Europe and judicial torture, there's only 1 country left in the whole world where it is legal under the written law of that country, which has been recently rewritten, to allow you to torture people, get a confession, and then use that confession to convict them. Only 1 country left. And judicial and crimes other than murder and slavery, everything's heading in the right direction. So why do you believe that things are getting worse? Because of the motto of the commercial media, for which I worked for about 1.5 years, or many years actually, TV weatherman and various other stations. The motto is, if it bleeds, it leads. If you've got a new wing put onto a library at a school, or while they're putting up the wing, a wall collapses, which one makes it into the news? The one with the blood. If it bleeds, it leads. So to summarise, we can fix and reverse global warming. You are living in the most peaceful time ever in the history of the human race. And students are the smartest generation ever. And now I'll stop sharing. Where are we? Getting my mouse back. How do I do that? Yeah. Well, here we go. Can I see that? Here we go. Coming back. And I'm back. Okay. Here we are. Now we're at the 23-minute mark. So any questions, Dr. Ross, from the audience?
Okay. So we want gallery there. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Yes. Well, my fault, Carl. I didn't make a point of saying at the start that people could comment through the Q&A panel if they're in Zoom, or through the comment stream if they're in Facebook. And I have a colleague sitting with me monitoring the Facebook feed for questions coming through. And I must admit, some of these comments are a little bit, I'm not sure what they're getting at, but thank you, Dr. Karl.
Well, they're talking about my fabulous singing ability there, Dr. Ross.
Yeah, yes, okay. We see other generational changes, like people growing taller, and is this just nutrition and living conditions, or is there something else going on?
Okay, now let's answer the question.
Sorry,
people
talking
getting taller,
about the
shall
Flynn
we?
effect. Yeah.
Okay, here's how it goes. Firstly, when you do pediatrics, they show you a nice curve of where you got the height and the weight and the age, and it just goes up smoothly.
Yep.
It ain't so, baby. There was a study done where they looked at a bunch of kids under the age of 24 years of age, and they found that they'd grow nothing and then suddenly do a little spurt. There was one extreme case of a kid who grew nothing for 3 months and grew 18 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch in a night. These were kids who were being measured every day.
Right.
Okay. Now, what I'm heading towards that is that firstly, that you have these growth spurts, but that's a dramatic one. That kid had something special. That wasn't average, right? But on average, you have many growth spurts potentially wired into your DNA from when you are born until you sort of hit your late 20s. And if you miss out on one due to an infection or poor nutrition or emotional stress and many other things, you won't do the growing. Now, when I was a medical student starting off, somebody gave me a book of diseases of the fingernail or diagnosing via fingernails.
Yep.
There's about 150 diseases that you can diagnose just by looking at people's fingernails. And if you look at the hands, oh my God, there's so much more. And so with regard to the fingers, if you get a sudden stopping of the growth, you find a thing called a bowline, B-E-A-U. The word is spelled B-E-A-U, like the French for beautiful. And you've got this line going across where there's no growth. And if it's really severe, it extends across all of the fingers. So what I would do is sort of look at it, put my little ruler, work out how many millimeters, divide by the age of the person, how many millimeters a week they grow. And I'd say, did you have a severe illness 6 weeks ago? And they'd say, yeah, I was really crook then, okay? So if during one of those severe illnesses, besides not growing your fingernails, you miss out on that growth curve. Okay, that's a bit of background. Now, here's another little diversion which brings us back into the same thing. Sir Joseph Banks was just under 2 meters tall, or 6'8". So way back then, it was possible to reach the full genetically potentially available height, providing you had good nutrition, avoidance of disease, blah, 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 emotional stability. And you had the right genetics. Third data point. When the British went to what would become the United States of America, suddenly there were all these people who were living on the land, eating well, and doing exercise. And within a generation or so, these people were up to a head taller than the British soldiers. The British soldiers were working class, not the officers, but the grunts, the redcoats. They were a full head shorter. And thanks to a whole bunch of factors, the people of America were the tallest people on Earth for about 2 centuries. I wrote about this in one of my previous books. And then beginning around the 60s and 70s, they began to lose this as private medicine came in. So what you have in America is a medical care system that per person costs twice as much as the next most expensive medical system in the world, which is Switzerland, but rates somewhere between 20 and 50 in the whole world. It's the most expensive, but really, really does not deliver for what it charges the people. And so you're actually finding now in America that the height is going down. We're actually finding that the life expectancy is going down in certain age groups. Now, is this still true, Ross, that the death rates for women delivering a baby, is that still going up, or is it stabilized?
In the States, I think you're right. Yeah, I've heard that. Yep.
So we've got one of the wealthiest countries on Earth where the death rate is increasing and the life expectancy is decreasing. And you can just have a look at what happened with COVID-19 and the masks. So now the tallest people on Earth are the Dutch. Now I'm getting to the end of that question. And what happens in Holland is a public system whereby every woman, when she gets pregnant, has access to immediate professional care without having to go through a nurse or a GP. And on the way into pregnancy, she has immediate access to the obstetrician, no time delay, her own obstetrician. And on the way out for the next 2 years, she's got immediate... Should have switched the phone off. What do you reckon, Ross?
Yep.
And then on the way out, for the first 2 years, she's got immediate access to a pediatrician. And they are the tallest people on Earth. Was that a good enough answer to that question?
I think you answered a lot of questions, some of which had been asked and some hadn't.
Biggest question's got an easy answer
I've realised I made another mistake, apart from saying that you could put in comments, and that is that I didn't change the name on my box. It's Robin Considine because Robin is the name on the contract we have with Zoom. And I didn't correct that to me as the host. So I'm Ross Kerridge, which a lot of people
My ex-fellow student from the past.
Yes. I'm not Robin Considine, but Robin will be watching elsewhere.
And some poor bonus saying, hi, Ross. Okay, will I go looking
you're
into
you're seeing the chat group.
The chat questions?
Yep. You're seeing them, aren't you?
Yeah. Okay, let's pick one. No reason.
Well,
the
one about
there's
one about Paris. There's a couple about Paris climate agreements.
The Paris climate, it is the bare minimum of what we have to do. Of course it will. What we have to do is, okay. Go to two websites. Website number one, drawdown.org, DRAWDOWN.org. And there's a 100-page document. It'll take you about an hour to read. Have fun. And then go to the website BZE, beyondzeroemissions.org.au, bze.org.au. I'll in fact type that in there while I'm typing here. So bze.org.au, and go there. BYE, no, BZE. I can't even bloody type anymore. And then read that whole thing, especially the one called the Million Job Plan. It'll take you roughly as long to read as the football on tonight, which begins, I believe, in 18 minutes.
Yep.
Or 10 to 8, which I'll be watching. And to celebrate various political events, instead of having beer and chips, I'm having champagne and chips. Yeehaw. And might even have a drink with an umbrella in it as well. So if you read those two documents, you will have all the information that you need to see what we can do and how we can do it. But we just need different politicians. The politicians we had are overwhelmingly not fit for purpose. I do have a very reliable and cheap way to fix up climate change, but it's illegal. What should I do, Ross? Will I mention it or not?
Yeah, I think you better mention it.
Okay, it's totally illegal, but it would work. It's really cheap. Bribe the politicians. They're so bloody cheap. We've got Australian politicians, you can buy them for $5,000. Mate, it's illegal though. So just replace them, run for politics yourself.
Well,
So Jeff Mulhern is saying, am I positive that climate change will be addressed adequately by Australian politicians? I am confident they will not. They are not fit for purpose, except for a few of them, like the one that replaced Tony Abbott. Good up for her. Forget her name, it's got a Z in it. So yes. Now, if you're thinking, I don't want to run for politics because they're all crooked, with that sentence, you've filled the old cliche of all that's needed for evil to win is good people do nothing. Go ahead and do nothing. I got really angry at the politicians in 2007. It was a great education. It cost me a lot of money. I'm still paying it off, but it was a great education. Run for politics or support people who will. Will our politicians do nothing? No. Just go into politics or support them. Okay, next question. What are you seeing, Ross? Is a good question.
What do you think about the announcements about COVID vaccine?
Well, in this case, I'm not an expert in infectious diseases nor immunology. I'm still getting my head around the fact that a vaccine can either stop you having the disease or stop infection, and they're two separate things. In fact, it was only recently, like, I don't know about you, Ross, but when I did immunology, it just about busted my brain.
Yep.
So a bit of background.
I never understood it. Still
no, mate, no. It's important. In fact, that's where you'll see all the smart doctors, not in brain surgery, in immunology. And so when Ross and I went through, okay, for each term, they give you a book that's about the size of a thing that used to be called a phone book. It's got about 1,000 pages. You had 3 months to learn it, and you had to do 2 or 3 at the same time. When it came to immunology, they gave you a book the size of the Reader's Digest. And then once you start going in, you see all these bloody feedback loops and you go, oh my God, I've got no idea what's going on. So I had no idea until recently that inside the lymph nodes, when you get infected, a temporary organ called the germinal center, never knew of it, pops into existence and starts manufacturing antibodies of many different types with different lifespans. I had no idea. And you can have 2 twins apparently getting in similar doses, and one of them makes a germinal center and one doesn't. We don't know. Getting back to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, I'm basing this on what I read plus listening to CoronaCast. Norman Swan spends all of his days thinking about this and nothing else, and he's doing a damn good job. So I go to him. Number one, this announcement was made by press release, not by a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah.
Number two, it is so missing in so many useful information that it's virtually useless. You don't know, we don't have all the data, we don't have the full, it's a hint of something going on. The third thing, if this vaccine is going to be used, they do have the advantage of being, first past the post, but you got to move it around the countryside at minus 90 degrees C. Okay, on one hand, liquid nitrogen, minus 100 and something, is cheaper than milk. Right. But you need skilled people, which is a whole different level from chucking it in a fridge and sending it around the country. So I am following my general rule, which is just to wait for it to happen. I'm quietly thinking now, tell me what you reckon on this one, Ross. I reckon that we'll have the vaccine sort of well and truly rolled out by the middle of next year. And by the end of next year, we'll have settled into the new normal, and it won't be as good as measles, where one dose fixes you forever, but it'll be probably more like you have to get an update every year. Now, tell me how much of that you agree or disagree with, bearing in mind I'm being totally hypothetical with zero data because I've forgotten all the medicine I knew anyway.
Well, look, I'm an anaesthetist. Obviously, it's way out of my specialty, but I do have the privilege of talking to people, who do know some of the stuff. And one of my very close friends is very much at the front line of this. And yeah, that's the same message that I'm getting there. But we do have all these other questions. But
okay, go to the next question.
In terms of no, hang on. You said moving it around the. Remember back in the 1970s, they said there is no way that we would ever be able to vaccinate people in the third world against smallpox because of just the logistics of it. And it was Frank Fenner, Australian scientist, who said it could be done. And then Donald Henderson got it going through WHO, and they did it. But I mean, then in the HIV epidemic, Australia's public health response was the best in the world in the HIV epidemic, because again, we are led by scientists. So plus some smart politicians and some smart politicking. But anyway, so we've got a good track record.
Cool.
And
I
we
had
should
a small
celebrate
part to play in that as well, Ross.
Did you?
Yeah, I was. I dropped out of medicine at that stage.
Yeah.
And I spent 1985 not doing Medicine 5, but starting up a TV show called Quantum on the ABC TV.
Ah, that's right. Yep.
And people were just scared of these people with AIDS, treating them like some sort of leper, that if you even saw one, you die. And so I went and worked with a bunch of people, including Ross Bradbury, the infectious diseases person and so forth. He was a censor of the college. And I came on stage with, on a camera at the beginning of the show, with a 5-litre beaker full of pink liquid. And I said, if you want to get infected by contact with an AIDS person, just by being near them, you would have to kiss them so hard that you would have to have 5 litres of their saliva in one go. And then you've got a good chance of getting infected. But shaking hands with them, nothing. Kissing them, nothing. Kissing them with 5 litres, you got a good chance. Sharing a house with them, you just don't get it that way. There's a specific way of getting it, and you can live with them, and that helped diffuse it. So on one hand, there were all the medical people doing, and you were part of that, doing all this wonderful stuff, and I was doing a bit of song and dance in the public arena, trying to make people feel a little bit, less scared of people with AIDS. Yeah. And with regard to AIDS, it's already killed 30 million people. That's a terribly large number before we came up with something. This morning, we're about 2/3 of the way, 50 million people infected, to getting 1% of the world infected, and we've got 1.25 million people dead. So call it 1% of the people infected, 1.25 million dead. Multiply that by 100, you're looking at 125 million. The vaccine will stop that. And what we did in Victoria was just amazing.
Yeah.
Where
it is extraordinary.
On the 1st of August, Victoria had 500 cases a day. The UK had 700. Roll forward to the end of October, Victoria's down to 000. United Kingdom, 20,000 a day.
Yep.
And the United States, 120,000. And we were a bit slow, but we got there. And for doing such a good job in Victoria, the Australian attacks and the Murdoch press attack Victoria every day, conveniently ignoring that they got 0 deaths. And Taiwan, they had 7 deaths in total. They got the same population as Australia.
Yep. Yep. Can uh, well, you can see the questions too, but
Yeah, you
do
pick
you
one
have
because
one that you
otherwise
want to
you
pick
can
up on?
probably think better than
We
I
we
can.
didn't finish on the zero carbon thing, and you said something that you wanted to come back to it.
Well, there's a few things I can go. I can go into the social media. I've got a presentation ready there, which will run for about 10 minutes.
Yep. Okay, we can do that.
You
Yep.
reckon?
Yep.
Okay, here we go into the social media. Oh, I've got to start sharing
Sharing
first, haven't
screen again.
I?
Yep.
Here we go. Sharing, sharing, sharing. Where is the sharing thing? Oh, there it is there. I'll have to go back to that window. Right. And then share and then make sure I've got my sound on. And here we go in 3. Can you see that surfing
Yep.
safari background thingy?
Yep.
And can you see social media?
Yep.
We're up and running. The business model of the social media, and I got this from a whole bunch of things, including the Netflix movie Social Dilemma. I recommend watching that. Is basically telling lies for profit. If the product is free, then you are the product. You've heard that, but you're thinking, okay, so I've got this app. How come I'm the product? What they have is either data about you or your attention. In this case, Google, social media, Facebook, they mine your attention and they sell it off to advertisers. And when you click on a new homepage, all of your details, about 3 to 14 gigabytes, are auctioned off to about 500 or so big advertisers who then, within a hundredth of a second, buy the right to show you the ads on the next page you go to, about 20 or so ads, and they pay between 1 and 5 cents for that. And they know all about you. Like with regard to human relationships, they know if you're divorced or open relationship or separated, or even if it's complicated, to pick a nice euphemism. And they even divide it into subcategories and subcategories. And this is a new category that was invented for the COVID-19 thing. So there are some people who want things to go back the way they were, and it's everybody for themselves, but they're doing okay financially. And there are other people who are thinking, well, I could make a lot of money out of this. I'm not worried about the disease. And there are other people, as simplifiers, who are worried about their money, but they can sort of get out of it and they want to go back to a simplified life later. And there are other people who are more worried about getting the disease and dying. And there are other people who have been poor all their life and they know that they're being screwed right now. And they reckon, and to some degree, there's a bit of, I can sympathize with them. There's every person for themselves. So they slice and dice you, the advertisers, up so many different ways, and it changes from day to day and week to week and month to month, that they can target the ads just for your homepage, for you. And then they repeat it over and over again. 1 to 5 cents is what they make Google. And you're thinking that's not a lot of money, but then they end up making a huge amount of money. And the more you click, the more they make, and they don't care why you click. All they care about is that you click. Why you click? Well, what about the case of Google in the last quarter of 2019, where they earned over $39 billion in revenue? And you think, oh yeah, well, they've got professional services. What else have they got? Phones and stuff. Mate, 32 billion of that was advertising. Facebook, out of 16.9 billion, advertising was 16.6. And they don't care what you click on so long as you click. Amazon, well, they mainly sell stuff, but they made a bit of money off that. It's 3.4 billion. I mean, it's not much, but you get $1 billion here and $1 billion there. Pretty soon it adds up to some real money. You can do something with it. And so the fake news spreads 6 times faster, and there's a good reason for that. Suppose it's 200,000 years ago, and then you're in Africa, and you see a little flash of stirring of khaki in the undergrowth. You go and have a look at it, or run away from it. It could be a lion. So it is good for us to pay attention every now and then, not all the time, just every now and then. If you're continually being bombarded with new stuff, it just wears you out. And this is spread not by humans, but by artificial intelligence. Don't think that artificial intelligence is going to be really weird when it comes. It's already here now. This guy here, Kyrie Irving, He went for saying the earth is flat because he clicked on it, because the algorithms decided, not humans, that that would attract his attention, and it spread from him around the world. And suddenly we got all these people saying the earth is flat. He then went on on stage and said, I'm sorry about that. And then later he got attacked by being part of the round earth conspiracy. I too have been accused, Ross, of being paid off by both big NASA and big Globe for saying the earth is round. You know about Big Globe? They're the people who make money out of selling globes of the earth. Yeah, I know. Right. So these algorithms, you think you can win, but there's you, and then there's a screen. And on the other side are tens of thousands of very clever people, psychologists and computer programmers and everything, who wrote algorithms and had huge numbers of supercomputers, rooms, buildings full of supercomputers that run at enormously high speeds. And you can see how the supercomputers have taken off in their processing power over the last 15 years or so. You can't fight against that. And they win. And then you click on the algorithm about you click on the picture of the cat, or, hey, the earth is flat. Scientists have proven it. Nah, I'll click on it. It doesn't matter why you clicked. They got 1 to 5 cents out of you. Unfortunately, these computers and the artificial algorithms are evolving really fast, but our brains, nothing. Mate, the Flynn effect, 9 IQ points every generation. They're way ahead of us. 2 million years of evolution did not prime us for this. 2 million years of evolution was that every now and then you go out and you kill a dinosaur and you bring it back to the family and they say, you're a good boy, Ross, we love you, make sure you do it again, as opposed to wanting to get it every 5 minutes from people you don't know. And it's shallow. And so you do a photo and there you are getting 5,000 likes. And you say, okay, I got 5,000. But if I stand on the top of this waterfall and then lean right over and then take a photograph, maybe I'll get 10,000. And that's bad enough, but it gets even darker than that. Here we are looking at teenage girls, primary school and high school. Upper primary school, lower high school mix. What happened to them that increased by a factor of 3 since 2009? Hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm went up by 3. Suicide went up by 3 in 2009. What's so good about 2009? Well, 2009 on one hand was when we walked across Spain. It was about 800 kilometres, took us 5 weeks. And here we all are at the beginning of the Santiago de Compostela. And the photograph was taken by an official photographer. That's her there in blue. And I was taking it on my beautiful smartphone. Now look at these fields. We accidentally timed it, so we went across in spring. Oh my God, look how beautiful it is. It was so wonderful. And I could take photos with my real smartphone. This was the first real smartphone, besides being a phone for voice. I could take photographs, but I could do email and GPS and internet and text. I could even do Spanish-English translation, but it wasn't very good. When I said, my father-in-law is a little bit allergic to nuts, the translation was, my father-in-law has small testicles. Okay, but that was just an early one. But suddenly you got this computer in your hand. And in 2009, 2010, the first generation had access to this thing in their hand that gave them the whole world. They're the first generation to interact mostly online versus face-to-face, but it's free. No, it's not, because everything they do that's free is financed by people who want to sell them ads. The basis of everything in social media, the very rock-solid basis, is not telling them what's going on. And when they do tell them, they're lying about it. It's deceit and manipulation. And if you build your house on sand, bad things will happen. We used to monitor kids' viewing habits on Saturday mornings, but now they can look at anything and we have no control. And this is what happens. We have people reading on their smartphones that the deep state conspiracy, which is satanic pedophiles, sell the children through pizza shops. And so somebody with an automatic rifle goes into a pizza shop in Washington because they believed what they read. And why did they put that up on the screen? So they could get him to earn them 1 to 5 cents. And another effect is that people got further apart. In the old days, you could have a difference in political opinion with somebody, you still have a Barbie with them, but now hate sells so many more ads than love, and people are spreading apart. And 1/4 of the Republican Democrats each believe that the other side is basically eating babies for breakfast. 1/4 of they believe demonic things of the other side. By the way, for those who are not familiar with American politics, the Republicans are kind of equivalent to our Conservative Party, and the Democrats are kind of equivalent to our Conservative Party. So these algorithms they send you down a rabbit hole, and you just stay there saying the earth is flat, the earth is flat. If you click on Wikipedia and get some real information, you'll get out. But no, that's up to you. Why are they doing it?
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business. It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
That's why they're doing it. Now, the solution, we can tax the data, an unusual thing, or we can regulate. And you think, what, regulate the internet? But we regulate whether you put a seatbelt or not when you go into a car, whether you can hit somebody or whether you can have slaves or sell organs. So we're not regulating what you and I do, we're regulating the big guys. Finally, after 16 years, Facebook has said it will ban anti-vaccination ads. How many babies died because Facebook would not ban anti-vaccination ads? Sometimes there's no two sides to the truth. We know who you are, Channel 9 and A Current Affair back in the 80s. That was one of the reasons I left the kids' hospital to go into the media, because after 20 years of 0 deaths from whooping cough, suddenly we had our first death. Thank you very much, A Current Affair, Channel 9. So they're confusing what's happening. They don't care about the truth. They just want you to click. Why? I learned about this from The Social Dilemma, the TV series, the movie, 1.5 hours on Netflix, but also these books, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, read that one, and also this book, Who Owns the Internet and How It Owns Us. Climate confusion, the big fossil fuel spends $150 million a year to create climate confusion. Very easy to understand why people are confused. Thank you very much, and I will now get out and back, and our time is 7 minutes to the top of the hour. Okay, any more questions?
Yeah. There was a very interesting question just popped up. I'm not sure. Sean has said, do you have current stats on the relative spend on psychological research for marketing commerce versus medical research?
I don't know anything about that. That's not my area. I'd love to go to a seminar from somebody who is an expert in that area.
That would be an interesting question.
Yeah. Now, Paul has said, if I buy a refrigerator, Amazon thinks I might be interested in 10 other refrigerators. That isn't AI. Well, firstly, you might look at the refrigerator, but you might not buy it. And secondly, we know for sure, and I've written about this in one of my previous books, that Amazon Alexa records what you say, even when it's not switched on. There was a unfortunate death in 2018 in, I think it was Alabama, and they forced Amazon to open up their records. And in somebody was found, a bunch of men got together to drink beer and watch football on TV, like we're going to watch football in 8 minutes, right? And in the morning, one of them was found dead, face down in the spa with an incredibly high blood alcohol level, and accusations of murder were raised. And after 3 years, they were able to force Amazon to open up its records. They were watching TV in one room. The spa was in another room. In a room between them was the Amazon Alexa, which had not been switched on. And they forced Amazon to open it up, and it recorded everything. And it was perfectly clear that it was a stupid, dumb drinking accident, not deliberate murder. Second example, 2 of my friends, and you've got this one as well, I'm sure. 2 of my friends have got a dog. It's an old dog. It's going to die soon. It needs teeth. It's going to die. Teeth are expensive. And they talked about this at the dinner table for 2 nights running. They did not do any web searches. Let me emphasize that. At no stage did they do a web search. On the 3rd morning, both of them separately started getting advertisements for dog dental surgery. Okay? They're monitoring us. Okay, Ross, you pick another question?
Yeah, we want you to finish on something positive.
Well, that's positive because now that we know about it, we can do something about it. We can regulate the big companies, and Australia's trying to do that. Big it up for them because they pay no taxes in Australia. 2 years ago, the amount of taxes paid by Google, Facebook, and Amazon in Australia was less than the amount of tax that our family paid.
It's.
By the way, we're not multi-billionaires.
I gather someone last week suggested that why isn't there a Australia Post version of Facebook or Google or whatever that is just provided, without advertising, and the cost of actually setting it up wouldn't be all that much, would it?
What
Just
we
to
need is
provide social
politicians who
media
care
as
about the
a
future. And if you're one
as
of
a public
those, let me
service.
know and I'll vote for you.
Right. Okay.
Okay, next question.
Jeff Mulhern said, if younger people are smarter today, how do we tap into that intelligence when most leadership is held by older people who seem to believe they're the only ones who can make decisions?
No idea. It's a different world. I was on a bus
engaged?
the other day and there was a 4-year-old kid sitting on the bus on their parents' lap. And the parent pointed something out of the window and the kid put their thumb and forefinger on the glass and then moved them apart to zoom in on the window glass of the bus. They're different from us. They have different skills. And it's our job, now that we've made their world a bit messy by letting the climate change thing go ahead, to help them fix it up for them and their children and their children. Don't know what to do. I'm listening. Speak up, and I'll do everything I can to help.
Pips asked, curious your thoughts of having more scientists within politics and positions of influence. We do have a chief scientist. I'm not sure. Do you think those positions are really making a difference, or are they just window dressing?
In Australia, the chief scientist has been changed over. The previous one was great. The new one is great. Overwhelmingly, we have politicians who deny the science of climate change. That's like denying the science of the times tables. You know, you learn the times tables when you're 2 years old and in kindergarten and in primary school. And it's like saying, I belong to such and such a political party. And therefore, while I do accept the 6 times and the 8 times tables, I do not accept the 7 times tables because I belong to this political party or this religious group or that social group. 7 times 2 is not 14, but 6 times 2 is 12. And that's where we're at now with many people in politics. But there are good politicians on both sides, but they're in a relative minority, I'm very sorry to say. Unfortunately, having a psychopathic personality gives you an advantage in politics. Bummer.
Yep.
Okay, next.
Well,
we're near the end.
Oh, well, one more. How do we convince people that a vaccine doesn't contain autism or government tracking devices?
Look at what happens the other way in Samoa, where the vaccination rate dropped down to 33%, and they had something like 80 people die, 5 of them overwhelmingly under the age of 5. The science is quite clear. Go to something like Wikipedia, which does not have advertisements. Unlike YouTube. People try to quote YouTube as a reference. It is not a peer-reviewed journal. Wikipedia is not, but the references are, and click on the references, and it's a good starting point. Anybody can change it, and they do, but look at the references, and it's perfectly clear that vaccines do not cause autism. Well, it's like saying it's perfectly clear that 7 times 2 is 14. It just is. There's no two sides to the story. Where do we go now, Ross?
Someone saying, Carl, get into politics.
I did in 2007 before we had social media.
Yep.
The amount of lies that were told about me, especially in the Murdoch press, were astonishing. And there was even an article on page 3. I was rung up and interviewed about a Monaro. My wife had a Monaro back then. Around town, it was a dog for fuel economy. But going up to Newcastle all the time, it was getting about 7 to 8 litres per 100 Ks. It was gorgeous. And it was my wife's car, not mine. And the article on page 3 of the Daily Telegraph said, Dr. Karl, climate hypocrite, vote this number or that number. And there's a whole lot of lies about me. Page 3 of the Telegraph. Thank you very much, Murdoch Press.
Okay. Look, Carl, it's been a fantastic session. If you can fit us in next year, I'm sure we'd love to have you again.
Oh, I'm hanging in there, man.
And you owe me one for tutoring your daughter. So I will hold you to that. Final question, and I should wrap up by saying to our audience, it's been a great year despite all the challenges. It's been exciting learning about all this new technology. We're going to be back, but anyone who has a lead for a great speaker or a good idea, we're always willing to hear through the website. And we'll be surveying all our members for feedback and new ideas. But the final question, and you've probably knew that this was coming, Dr. Karl, do you have a separate wardrobe for your bright shirts, and how many do you own?
My wife makes my shirts. They've got, they're made of cotton. They have 2 pockets. Pockets, see, 2 pockets. And over here, you're going to love this. I hope you get jealous. Look at this, mate. A special line of stitching for the pen holder. Plus, I've got long sleeves, cotton, and my wife makes them, and I've got a floating population of about 30 to 40 of these shirts. And as they wear out, they get thrown out and a new one gets made up. It's part of wearing bright clothing. Why should women have all the fun?
Yes, okay. All right. Well, thanks again. And that's been great. Thanks to all our members and supporters and casual people who have only just joined. Go to our website for more information, and we'll see you next year.
See you next year. Bye-bye, Dr. Ross, and
Okay.
bye-bye, everybody. Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.